Hello everyone, I'm Savematic17 and welcome to my site, Being Somebody Different. I hope you enjoy what I have to offer and I welcome you and I appreciate your attention that you're willing to give. You're perfectly free to, of course, jump right into the videos I've created and start watching them and enjoying them. But this has been created basically to give you some background on how this story was created, what some of the things are, and if you've got any questions, because you might notice that there's certain things about how it's played that might seem a little different or might not be immediately apparent on why I'm doing that. So I thought I would create this to sort of explain what went into the video a little bit and what my purpose is and what I wanted to achieve. A key thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to tie the story, the people, and the combat together. There's a lot of different people who've created videos on Twitch and on YouTube and elsewhere that are excellent stories where they play through the game and they're fantastic stuff. And I've noticed something though about a lot of people, and what often will happen is there's people that really love the story but aren't really interested in the combat. And in fact, sometimes for some of them the combat can be an annoying distraction and they just want to do the story. And that's fine. Nothing wrong with it. Perfectly fine. I've watched people who've done that. I've enjoyed it. And there's other people where they kind of click through the story and they just want to do the combat and they just want to beat it. And that's fine too. Nothing wrong with that. Both of them are valuable. Both of them are valid and they appeal to people, and that's great. And I've enjoyed stuff from both to an extent. But for me, there's something kind of missing in terms of what I like the best. And I just wanted to show something different. And that's where I try to directly tie the story together with the combat, where I try to emphasize both. And more importantly, I try to craft a combat style for my character that fits them in the story. In other words, based on their experiences and who they are as a person, they fight a certain way, and their party fights a certain way. This gets to something else. What I wanted to do is I wanted to tell this from what's known as a first-person perspective. And what that means is that it's told basically from the perspective of the character, not me. And what I mean by, well, in a way I'm pretending to be the character. So the idea here is that when I first start the video, there's about 1.5 to 2 minutes in the first video where I essentially kind of lay out some basic rules that I'm following, like I'm playing on Nightmare, no one's supposed to die. But then right after that, I try to jump into the character of Natia and play it from her perspective. And everything that I say are essentially her inner thoughts and her inner monologues with herself. And it's sort of what she thinks and what she feels at any given moment in time. And the idea is that you're supposed to focus on Natia and who she is, as opposed to me talking to you directly, if that makes sense. There are times when it may seem like she's breaking the fourth wall and talking to you. That's not exactly the case. Part of this story is her development as a person, because she has problems and issues, and over time she finds ways to master them. And one representation of that is sometimes she talks, and this may not be fully clear, but I'm hoping that it can be intuited by people, is that she's essentially in some ways trying to respond to this idealized perfectionist self of who she's supposed to be. And so she'll often say things like I'm sorry, or she'll talk, it's almost as if she's talking to someone or the audience, but she's not really. And that's because she's talking to this imaginary idea of herself. And then over time, she gets away from this imaginary, impossible to attain idea. That may not all make sense, but let's just roll with things as they are. And just keep that in mind as she sort of pushes that impossible to achieve idea of who she's supposed to be to the side, and then just moves on with her life and does the best she can. And the other thing is, she's a commoner dwarf. In order to make this kind of work, to try to bring the story and the combat together and have the two be tied together and reflected, I decided that one of the things I would do is play it on Nightmare. And I've beaten the game on Nightmare before, and there's nothing special about that. I'm sure there's lots of people who are much better at combat, and I know there are, who've done perfectly fine. But I wanted to sort of heighten the tension of the game and her experiences in it, because a lot of times she will express stress in battles. Normally it's me acting when she's like swearing or cursing, but occasionally I will get genuinely mad and then express that through her. And one of the things that might be interesting for you is to see, now is Natia just, now is this just acting, Or is this genuinely how the person feels who's playing the game? But hopefully more often you'll focus on what Nadia is thinking. So I played on Nightmare to sort of help heighten the tension, and that's usually how I play the game. The other thing is I have a rule that there's no deaths to party members. So if I fight a battle and Leliana or Morrigan or Alistair or Stan hit 0 hit points and they're dead, they're supposed technically incapacitated. Well, then I have to restart that battle. I want to fight every single battle in the game without anybody getting killed in my party. And that's tied to the story and who Nadia is and her philosophy as a leader. Also, NPC allies we will try to keep alive as well. I make no promises there. I will do my best, but they will probably die at times. So, the guys who are fighting beside you but you can't control, I'll do my best to keep them alive. The other thing is, and this kind of goes against the difficulty, but I just love Dog and adore him so much, is I use the Nexus mod for Dog mod. And one of the reasons I do that kind of bleeds into the next point of one of the requirements that I have for the game that I hope people will like, is that Dog is really neat, and I'm going to use him. And that does make it easier because there's 5 people instead of 4 in a party. So I tried to balance a little by making my rogues have to get sort of, there's this line called Beast where you can get animals to fight for you and pets, and I basically made it so that the rogues had to invest in that but can't use them. So it's not quite as much as an advantage as some people might think, because you can get pets at level 7 and level 8. Like, you can get these big bears at level 8, and you could have like 2 rogues with bears at level 8, and that would increase your party to 6, although they're not as cool as Dog, of course. So I tried to balance it, but I'm not going to use pets at all, so I'm going to try to balance it out that way. The other thing is, everyone has their own favorite characters, and I have my own favorite characters. But I also believe in trying to give everybody in the party, and this is kind of Nadia's philosophy of leadership, is she wants to develop everyone's capabilities as a fighter, in terms of their survivability, in terms of their ability to fight. She sees herself as a leader more than someone who fights directly herself. And so she wants to develop everyone to the extent that she can. And so I've got this kind of morbid rule that basically everybody, with possibly 1 or 2 exceptions, will have enough screen time, if you will, that they'll get at least 160 kills. Now, that's a pretty morbid way of looking at it. It's almost psychotic. But if you do check the character sheet, you can see that. And I was trying to figure out how to apportion this, and I thought that that was probably just the best, because that means that they all get to fight a lot, with maybe 1 or 2 exceptions. And but other than that, with 1 or 2 exceptions, and I'm not sure if it's going to be 2 or just 1, there's basically everyone will generally get at least enough screen time to get 160 kills, which is a lot of screen time in my opinion. It's kind of morbid, might sound a little psycho, but that's the best thing I could come up with. The other thing is, and I think I've mentioned this before a couple times, is that Nadia sees herself more as someone who leads instead of fights. She wants to help party members defeat enemies, even though she's a warrior. And warriors can do this. You have taunts, you have crowd controls. And so for her, you might see her go in, strike a guy a few times, then step back, and then let her other people come in and finish them off. And then she's going on to mess with someone else. Or she might distract the enemy, or when she could possibly just fight and kill them. And part of that is she wants to develop the team. She's more interested in leading the team. This is also one of the ways that I also try to help balance things with Dog Mod, is that you have a person who focuses more on helping the other people fight than actually fighting themselves. But she certainly does fight and kill a lot of bad guys. The other thing is that because of her style, she wants to reduce friendly fire, which is inevitable. So a lot of times, you'll play, and people will just... A good example of this, and I'm not really spoiling anything, but there's an attack called Walking Bomb. Excellent. Works very well. The problem is, on higher levels, if you play the way that I do, when it's basically a spell you cast, and it does continuous spirit damage, and then eventually, if the enemy dies, then they blow up and do a bunch of damage. Well, I don't use Walking Bomb because of this rule very much, because I've had too many situations in previous games where it blew up and it hurt my own people who were fighting. And sometimes my guys either died from the explosion or else they were badly enough injured that the enemy was able to kill them. And then I had to restart the fight. So even though Walkie Bomb is a great spell, and I'm not trying to knock it, and if you don't play the way I do, it's perfectly awesome, for my purposes, it's not that, it doesn't have that much of a utility. The other thing is, oh, and by the way, if I use too many superlatives like awesome this and cool that, I apologize. Sometimes I do that. The other thing I do is a lot of people, when they do these games, they like to keep the cinematic effect. So they don't want to pause at any moment. They want the combat to be continuous and flowing like an action movie. And that's perfectly fine. I'm not complaining about that. The thing is, that's not my style. And for what I want to do, it's not. So I will use a lot of paused combat. And part of that is, hey, I'm not good enough to beat the game with nobody getting killed by playing it just perfectly free-flowing. I'm just not that good. The other thing is, this helps me show Nadia's thoughts in a battle. Since her focus is so much on leading, pausing the game and then making choices reflects Nadia's orders or the training that she's given people that they now fulfill. You see what I'm saying? Is that pausing means this is what Nadia's thinking at this moment, and this is why she's doing this, and this is why she's doing that. And this is part of trying to tie the story in terms of Nadia's thoughts as a person reacting to the world with the actual combat that you conduct. Because pause combat tells you what she's doing as a leader. The other thing is, while it may hurt the cinematic element for things, it's also true that they do things like bullet time in movies. And the fact is that they incorporated this into the game. So it was expected that people would use it. And the third thing, and this is the other reason, is if you've ever been in a really stressful situation, and people talk about this as well, sometimes it feels like the world is slowed down and you're speeding up. And other times it feels like you're slowing down and the world is speeding up. And I've experienced this in a couple of car accidents that I was in. I was in a couple of bad car accidents. And I had, well, no. One was a car accident, and one was almost a car accident. No one got hurt. It was a bad car accident for the car, but no one got hurt in the one. And in the other one, we were able to avoid a car accident, but it was really close, and it was really scary. And in the first one, it was like everything slowed down. I wasn't driving, by the way. I was in the passenger seat. And in the other one, where I was also kind of in the passenger seat, but also had to help take over driving, help the guy drive, it was like the world slowed down and we sped up. And that was good, because it helped us avoid the accident. And so that's part of the reason why I think that's value to that, because it helps capture that as well. The other thing is I do employ a number of Nexus mods. I employ the more banter mod, which means people speak more often. And I do that early in the game. Not initially, but early in the game it appears. I don't remember exactly when. And I also do Dane's fixes. That actually happened halfway through the game. So there are a number of bugs and issues with different skills and combat abilities, and Dane's fixes those. I also employed what's called a Better Win mod. Now, the original Win, who is an older lady, is perfectly fine. And the Better Win is fine. You want to play with Better Win, that's good. If you want to play with the older Win, that's good as well. I actually kind of like the older Win because it means that you have more variety in who you're playing with. And I think it's interesting to have an older motherly figure who you play with. At the same time, one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted Natia to be, relatively speaking, the most, how should I put this, the most regular, in terms of physical attractiveness, to be the most normal looking character. In other words, I wanted all of the other female characters, and even male characters if I could, be more physically attractive than her. My idea would be that she is the least attractive character, physically attractive character in the game. That doesn't mean she's ugly, it just means she's more plain, or she looks more normal and ordinary. And that also ties into her story, both relative to her sister Rika and the life path that she chose. And I thought that would be interesting as well. It's not that she's unattractive, it's just everyone else tends to be more attractive, and she looks more like a typical woman would, if that makes sense, as opposed to this like extraordinarily beautiful, model-esque ideal. And I kind of wanted to have her be more like a regular person in terms of her physical appearance. She's pleasant looking, but she's not overly attractive. The other thing is there's a romance mod, but there's a spoiler behind that. And I do have a spoiler section for this. Finally, I used OBS program for recording and OpenShot editor. I am not an expert in any of those fields. I'm sure my edits are crude. I do the best I can. The other thing is there's foul language at times. It's pretty colorful, as they used to say. And in combat, for example, there will be swearing at times. And sometimes that's Natia being in character as Natia, and other times I'm genuinely angry. And it might be interesting to see if you can guess which is which. Finally, I've completed Dragon Age Origins. Basically, I'm editing and posting it now. So if you're like, well, I wish you'd play like this or that, I'm sorry. I can't go back and do that. Maybe in a future game, if I play it with a different person, I'll do that and I'll follow your advice. But for this, we're kind of stuck. Now, there are some challenges to this approach, because you'll notice I have this focus on trying to create a first-person perspective story. And you do want a fluent and flowing storyline that's dynamic and that is lively and keeps you engaged. But when you play a game, particularly one such as this with its design, there will be dead spaces where there's not a lot happening. And one example of that might be boring travel periods. This might be a case where you go into a dungeon, you fight for a while in the dungeon, then you want to change the party, so you go out, or you want to change, and then you got to travel out of the dungeon, and it could be 5 or 10 minutes, and then you have to visit a bunch of people, and it can be kind of boring, because there's not much to talk about. And what I'll try to do is I'll try to edit this, and also bring in some timestamps, if necessary. Try to edit this down, or put in timestamps. And for the timestamps, I'll try to put them in the video or do something like that. I don't know if I can do that. The other thing is, if you have suggestions, and since this is something I'm not quite sure of how I should deal with it, in the comments, one of the things you can do is say, hey, this period from here to here is the type of thing you should edit. So when you're doing this to this, edit that in the future videos. And I'll either go back and edit that video, maybe not that one, but I'll go back and I'll edit future videos like that, so that you don't have to cut through the boring travel periods where I've gone to the dungeon, I've gone through several areas, but now I want to leave and go back and do some stuff. The other thing is, and this is where there's people who really like the story and don't really care so much for the combat and the preparation. There's people who really like the combat and preparation and don't like the story, or they're less interested in the story. And so for some, there'll be periods where I'm doing a lot of preparation for a fight, where I'm visiting merchants, changing equipment, brewing potions, and so on. What I'll probably do is put in timestamps for that, so people who are more interested in the story or just cutting to the chase of the action don't have to watch that. And if it becomes a real issue and there's a lot of pressure, then maybe I will start trying to cut it out or make it some sort of separate video by itself. Anyway, if you have any questions about that, please let me know in the comments for this. Once again, I hope that helps. Now I'm going to finish by basically talking about the last thing, which is essentially the spoilers. So I'm going to do a countdown. I'm going to be all dramatic here and do a countdown from 1 to 10, from 10 to 1. And then I'll get to the spoilers. So if you don't want to hear the spoilers, feel free to stop it right now. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Spoiler time. Hope you didn't mind that dramatic. I just didn't know how else to do it. Didn't want to jump right to it saying, this is your last chance. Here we go to the spoilers. So now I'm going to show you the spoilers. So if you don't want to see the spoilers, step away. Last chance. I swear. Okay, here's a spoiler. The romance mod is the LRS Leliana romance mod, and it's a Nexus mod. It comes from Nexus, I should say. It's not a Nexus mod. Nexus is a place that stores mods, and this is basically one of the mods I got there. And I think I may need to make that clear. When I say I got something from Nexus mod, that's the site, and there's a bunch of different mods that are on that site. It's not like Nexus itself designs it. They're basically a clearinghouse or a holding company, if you will, for them. The other thing is, and this is more of an observation, is that one of the reasons I did this approach, of trying to bring the combat and the story more tightly together and interrelated is a number of people, particularly those who are really interested in the storyline, tend to favor the mages over the Templars, at least from the ones I've seen. I'm sure there are people who go against that very much. And so for people who focus really on the role-playing experience of I'm talking to someone and I'm interacting with them, I can see why they would favor the mages in many respects. And there's been some people who've argued that the game doesn't do a good job of balancing out the Templar and Chantry side with the mages, that it's too obvious that the mages are in the right. I would actually push against that. And the reason is, if you integrate the combat with the role-playing experiences, that starts to change things. Because on that, if you look at it that way, in terms of who you're actually fighting all the time, all of a sudden the Templars look a lot better than the mages. And I'm not saying that they are, but bear with me and I'll explain it. In this game, you repeatedly fight apostate mages, blood mages, and these are some of the most toughest guys you fight in the battle. The spellcasters are. Whether they're hitting you with a fireball and following it up with electricity, whether they're hitting you with Curse of Mortality or Crushing Prison, whether it's or an abominations beating a bunch of abominations beating on you and then blowing up in your face to cause further damage, or the demons that they summon and that they associate with, whether it's a pride or a desire demon, time and time again, you fight mages. In terms of Templars, there's only one time that you can argue that you fight Templars while they're doing their duty. Now, this doesn't mean you don't fight Templars at all. People are quick to judge that and go, wait, we fight Templars a lot in the Circle Tower. You do. Those are possessed and charmed Templars. Those are possessed and charmed Templars by either a blood mage or, under Uldred, or a demon. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Okay? They're doing it against their will or they've been tricked. When it comes to Templars, fighting as Templars or claiming that they're doing their duty, there's really only one time you fight Templars that I'm aware of. And that isn't even in the main Origins game. That's in Awakenings. And you fight 3. And you can choose to fight 3. You don't have to. I did. And of course, everyone remembers, this is when Knight Commander Rhineland and a couple of other Templars are not happy with Anders becoming joining the Grey Wardens. And then they challenge you, and then you have to fight them as part of his personal quest. Like I said, this is very spoiler heavy. But even there, they're only claiming to perform their duties. Because I could easily see a more moderate Templar leader, like Gregor from the Circle Tower, saying, no, don't do this. They joined the Grey Wardens. He's not our issue anymore. What's done is done. So she's kind of acting on her own. Maybe I could see other Templars maybe backing her up, but I could see other Templar commanders backing her up, or superiors, but others not. And this brings us to and even there, so I would say that one of the things that this does is it changes your impression, because otherwise, if you look at the role-playing experience, it does seem to heavily favor the mages over the Templars and the Chantry. But if you integrate the combat experience, things become more nuanced. And I can't help but wonder if they made the role-playing experiences so heavily favor the mages because the combat experiences were so one-sided, where you're always fighting mages all the time, particularly the most dangerous, and those are some of your most dangerous fights, and you're almost never fighting Templars. Maybe they didn't. Maybe that's just my idea. Anyway, that's just some food for thought. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. Bye-bye.